Arcade Heroes.
Hey everyone, this is Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and it's been a little while since I did the games turning a certain age videos. I kept saying that I would do one for 2006, so games that are turning 10 years old in 2016, but I've been sidetracked with a lot of things. So finally getting around to it. So let's jump into that. Now, before I get into the games, just want to discuss a little bit of history as far as 2006 goes. Now, with what happened in the arcade industry in the early 2000s, that's where the impression came along that the arcade is dead or had died. And that happened due to a market crash of the arcade sector in 2001 through maybe about 2004. It was during that time where big names that had always been around the video arcade since the 70s were suddenly gone. Atari Games, Midway Games had closed down and switched over, well, Midway at least switched over to console developments. They owned Atari, and so they just effectively shuttered that as well. Capcom USA stopped releasing titles over here and just focused on Japan. Taito had done so earlier in the 90s, but it just showed how the market wasn't supporting all of those particular releases for whatever reasons. Now, of course, could be attributed maybe to the rise of home game consoles at the time. That was about the time where the PlayStation 2 came along, the GameCube and the original Xbox. Unfortunately led to the demise of the Sega Dreamcast. But one thing that's worth noting in all this is that companies like Sega and Namco and a few others still kept making arcade games despite this downturn. So even though the big names like Midway or Atari were gone, there was still a need to have video arcade games out there. There were still video arcade locations. Dave and Buster's and Chuck E. Cheese's and other types of locations, mom and pop style. Barcades hadn't become the thing yet, but the actual barcade had started in New York City, I think around 2004. But either way, in 2004, you had a company like Raw Thrills, headed by Eugene Jarvis and Andrew Eloff, where they were both from Midway, ex-Midway employees, and there was also Play Mechanics, which had been around since 1995, and a lot of those guys, George Petro and some others, Scott Pikulski, had been working for Midway. And so a lot of the people that had work in the arcade industry were still around. They still wanted to make video arcade games, and so they made those companies that would do that. So with 2006, yes, there were game releases in 2006, and some of those came from these companies. And so let's take a look at what turns 10 this year. So with our game roster, now that we have the history out of the way, let's get started into that. We'll do it alphabetically like I've done on the other games, but let's start off with Sega and their Afterburner Climax game. Now, of course, the word Afterburner is well known to anybody that's into video games. The first in the series coming out back in 1988, and really showcased the idea of scaling graphics. But with Afterburner Climax, what it was meant to showcase, of course, were 3D graphics, more modernized graphics, and screaming along at high-octane frame rates as you would do what you want to do in Afterburner, and that's blow up every enemy that comes across your path, fire off tons of missiles, and fly through their smoke trails and whatnot. Of course, you had your machine gun as well, but it was usually more fun to blast them with your missiles. So with Afterburner Climax, I had a number of locations that just looked really amazing from a graphics standpoint, but also when the hardware, Sega released a few different cabinets for different sites to enjoy. So of course they had the sit-down standard cabinet, which just had your throttle and joystick to enjoy. With the step up from that was a cabinet that had some partial motion to it, kind of a swivel seat type motion, and to mimic some feeling of a simulator, of a flight simulator of sorts. And then you had the full-blown motion version, which they called the Super Deluxe, where the entire thing was on a motion platform, so the monitor would also move with you. came across two of those once at the Vegas Gameworks several years ago. I don't know if they still have those. It seemed well, it was a little surprising to see two of those. I know they cost about $32,000, but it was GameWorks. That's where they used to splurge on all the Sega stuff. But after that, sticking with the A's, and also speaking of play mechanics, which I just mentioned in the historical portion of this, is Aliens Extermination. This was developed by Play Mechanics for Global VR, and Global VR, interestingly enough, has continued manufacturing this one, and as far as I'm aware, you can still buy an Aliens Extermination brand new from them. This would mark one of the longest uninterrupted runs on a manufacturing and arcade game, perhaps. It is the record for the longest. You can see even games like Pac-Man had their hiatus and whatnot, and of course I don't know if you could really count Pac-Man, just because usually when that's been re-released, like with the 20th or the 30th anniversaries, it's included other games on it, and it's not just been the original Pac-Man that they're rebuilding. But anyways, with Aliens Extermination, this provided a solid light gun game for locations to enjoy, for players to enjoy, based on the popular Fox Aliens franchise. And so you would blast those evil xenomorphs in a setting that was a lot like the the Aliens from 1986 by James Cameron, directed by James Cameron, I should say, where you had the space marines and their bug hunt and all of that. So you have to be careful not to shoot other marines, which could damage your health. But what was really cool about the cabinet were the mounted guns, which were designed to be like pulse rifles, and in fact they even had a red LED ammo counter on there, kind of like the movies, but instead of it being on the side of the gun, it was on the back, which makes more sense. And with the guns also have a grenade launcher and a flamethrower button as well. And for the time, pretty good graphics and just overall solid game. Now this one used an ammo-based system, and so you'd have to shoot ammo power-ups on occasion to keep that going. Now if you ran out of ammo, they had a nice feature where it would switch over to being a pistol. So it was infinite ammo as a pistol. It's just a lot harder to take out some of those xenomorphs when they're flying at you or face huggers. But yeah, that's Aliens Extermination, and that was also released in some other cabinet designs. One most people came across was a 29-inch CRT, but Global VR has done a 50-inch LCD version, although they didn't adjust the resolution to be HD, so it looked kind of weird. And speaking of play mechanics, they were one company that really pushed on creating a hunting game, which was something that would work out well in bars. And so the name that everybody's heard is Big Buck Hunter, and in 2006 they released a sequel to within the Big Buck Hunter series or franchise. That was Call of the Wild. Now, this was published, you could say, or manufactured by Incredible Technologies, and this was the last version that Incredible Technologies did, as in 2006, Raw Thrills and Play Mechanics combined their powers like Voltron and became one company, essentially, or Play Mechanics became a wholly owned subsidiary of Raw Thrills. But with Call of the Wild, it added bonus rounds, which is a staple in the whole series at this point, added more regions, more animals, things of that nature to keep people interested, and of course online play, which I'll get into in a moment on Sega's alternative to hunting. But before that, I got a couple of other games to mention, and that would be Konami's DDR Supernova. Now, DDR is a name that everybody knows, and or I guess I should have thrown this out earlier, is that a lot of the titles we're going to talk about all have very known names, known licenses, lots of sequels came around at this point, not too many utterly original titles, which is kind of an issue with a lot of modern gaming. But anyways, DDR Supernova, so this kept the formula the same. You still had the arrows set up in the cardinal directions, and you'd play different songs. They added 64 new songs to this. They did make some changes to the scoring system, simplified it so it would be a little easier for certain players to get into. But this was roundly criticized as one of the manufacturing arms that had worked on this. A U.S. distributor had used wood inside of the inside of the pads, and of course wood does not hold up very well to people stomping on pads constantly, and so that was something that had to be rectified with other releases. But of course 10 years later, looks like we're going to have DDR 2015 coming out sometime this summer, and Konami just announced last month in February DDR-A, so we'll have to keep an eye on that one. Also from Sega, and this is going to be a very Sega-heavy list from 2006, is Dynamite Deka EX. This is the third in the series of titles where the 3D brawling. In the United States, it was first popularly known as Die Hard Arcade, and then became Dynamite Cop. But Dynamite Deka EX never got a lot of coverage over here. It was just released as a kit upgrade for the Sega Naomi arcade platform. So I've only really seen this one in Asia. Wanted to get one myself for my own arcade, just never got around to it for whatever reason. But the mechanics are all pretty much the same as what you expect from the 3D brawling games. It's kind of an arena fighter, so to speak, as opposed to how the 2D brawling beat-em-up games work. But it did have some enhanced graphics, improved graphics over the previous Dynamite Deka games, and so just overall hard to break that formula, and never really heard any criticisms of this particular game. Apologies for the wardrobe change, just had to reshoot a couple of the games, so hope you don't mind. Hope it's not too distracting. But let's jump into another Sega game, and that would be Extreme Hunting Online 2. And as I mentioned, Big Buck wasn't the only hunting game that was available in arcades, particularly for bars, or bar arcades, I guess you could say. And with what Sega had to offer, it was a bit different than what Big Buck would do. With Extreme Hunting, the Extreme Hunting series, you had limited ammunition, so you had to be very careful about taking your shots. You couldn't just spray and pray. But it also had, at least with Extreme Hunting Online 2, different weapons to choose from. So you had your rifle, but you also had a shotgun, you had a bow or a crossbow, I believe it was. And so that changed up some of the feel elements to the game, making it a little more interesting, so you can go back and see how you play with different guns. Didn't just focus on like buck type animals, like as you see in the video here. You have bears that you have to shoot, and of course, like the Big Buck series, you want to hit the vital areas and those sorts of things. But with Extreme Hunting 2 Online, this was also designed to have online tournaments between different players at different locations, but this did mark the last time Sega attempted this. Since then, Big Buck's definitely taken over the whole hunting circuit, so to speak, and out-of-home entertainment. But I guess who knows, maybe they'll try to give it another shot one of these days. And another Sega game is Ford Racing Fullblown. And this is actually a game that started a trend for Sega that they continue to this day. And that's taking a home a home console game and porting it over to the arcade. And with racing games, this has been done not just by them, but other companies have done so as well. But Sega's really taken to doing that, as after this game they've done titles like Grid, and right now they're actively selling Showdown, which is based on Dirt Showdown. It's just they take elements out of that which only really work for consoles, like sitting on a menu for hours picking parts or something like that, and whittle it down so that you don't have to spend so much time doing things like that, but maintaining a lot of the core elements and turning it more into an arcade racer or something that works better in an arcade setting. So with this game, you could just race a variety of Ford cars over a variety of terrains. It had off-road as well as on-road type racing, but I haven't seen this one out there too often, maybe once or twice. Another game I had to reshoot here with the different red clothing is a game by Taito, and that was Half-Life 2 Survivor. Now, this surprised a lot of people when it came out, as first-person games in the arcade never really took off. I mean, there were a few in the late 90s, like War Final Assault by Atari Games, and there was Outriggers by Sega, which was early 2000s, but just it always was a little difficult for the style of gameplay to really work in the arcade sector, at least from what they tried to do. Personally, I found War a lot of fun. I've not played Outrigger, but Half-Life 2 anyways, this brought the very famous Half-Life property to arcades, Japanese arcades in particular, and this one had a very unique control scheme. So you had two joysticks. One of them was made that looks kind of like a mouse and a joystick combined, that was used for the WASD type movement, but you also had foot pedals for doing things. I believe it was jumping or something along those lines. I've come across some of these cabinets once at a trade show, but didn't get a lot of time to spend with it. It was a few years ago. But overall, this had three different modes. It had a story mode, which was very different from the story modes in the Half-Life 2 games, featuring a very pared down version, didn't have puzzle elements and lots of cutscenes or anything like that. It was just very arcade focused. There was a mission mode, which is a lot like the wave-based type games. It would have things like collect gems or destroy the zombies at their spawning point or something like that, and that worked for network play as well. And then of course there was the deathmatch network, which was just something to play as far as going deathmatch goes. Not a whole lot to say about that. But if you wanted Half-Life, this gave it to you. Now, unfortunately, this was only officially released in Japan. It was tested out in the United States by Namco around 2007 in the Chicago area, but it failed the location tests, unfortunately. So that just kind of left anybody that was looking forward to that in the dark with cold. Taito did follow up with this with a very strange, unique game that still used the same engine in 2009 called Cyberdiver. And there was also Counter-Strike Arcade, Counter-Strike Neo, that had been released prior to this. So in Japanese arcades, they seem to take more towards the first-person shooters than we do out west, oddly enough. They also did have Left 4 Dead Arcade a year or two ago as well, Taito did. And then to continue on even more with Sega is Let's Go Jungle, and as far as I recall or I'm aware, this was probably the #1 arcade game back in 2006, and with Let's Go Jungle, the reason why that is, it was a light gun game, but it used some elements that you would find in titles like Gunblade, but tied it to a more casual style of play. So of course that meant no reloading necessary. That's something that's always worked out really well for certain arcade titles, and with Let's Go Jungle it certainly did. But this one also had a strong focus on co-op play. Like if you play it as a single player, it actually isn't as fun as playing it with somebody else. Now of course in the game you have a male and a female component, and you're seeing your compatibility and hearts and all this other cheesy stuff. But they threw in a few other scenarios where it wasn't just simply blasting enemies. It would be, I remember this odd one where you would smack frogs with oars, which felt a little strange, but either way, the presentation of the cabinet, which looked like a Jeep, you would sit inside of it, kind of like the Lost World cabinets by Sega, just created a component that people really got into. And I actually remember the first time that I came across this game at a local arcade. I had to wait 45 minutes to get a chance to play it. It had lines, and so that was something I hadn't experienced in a while. And so kudos to Sega for making that. And they did come out with a sequel a few years later, Let's Go Island, although that one did not do as well, as far as I'm aware, as Let's Go Jungle managed to do. And then one that's kind of, say, along the lines of Sega, it uses Sega hardware, and this is another very well-known name in arcades, and that's Metal Slug 6. 10 years prior, in 1996, was the release of the first Metal Slug, and so Metal Slug 6 had a lot of prequels that established how it would play. Now with this running on, this was the first time that it was actually running on something that wasn't the Neo Geo MVS. It was running on the Atomus Wave, which is basically just a Dreamcast with some different I/O stuff on it, but the core hardware, it's no different from a Dreamcast. It's actually weaker than the Naomi, as it has less RAM. But anyways, with Metal Slug 6, they added an easier or hard mode that you could select at the beginning, so that if you want to do hard mode, that's how you had to experience the full game. As an easy, you could only go up to a certain point, and then it would say, to be continued, play in hard mode. But with that, it also added more characters, including, you had... Sorry, I need to read this. Ralph Jones and Clark Still from previous SNK games, such as Akari Warriors and the King of Fighters. And so with those additions, and each character had statistics, ways that would change play or different perks, that added a lot to the replay value. And then you also had a weapon switching system, so that when you collect weapons, you wouldn't have to worry about grabbing something like a flamethrower when you had a shotgun already, or a rocket launcher, as you can now save it and just push a button to switch between weapons as opposed to losing it. Overall, animations on this look really nice. Graphics package obviously upgraded thanks to the hardware, but still had the Metal Slug look to it, and just overall was pretty well liked. Earned really well on location for a while. I think the only criticism against it was it had no blood, although that was recently discovered, where a code was discovered where you could get into a debug menu and activate the blood. So that's no longer an issue, even though it wouldn't help the game earn any differently at this point. But that was also the last time Metal Slug's come out to arcades. Whether or not the SNK is ever going to bring one back remains to be seen, but it does seem unlikely, at least for the time being. Now, another racing game, but not Sega, actually. It was Raw Thrills' Superbikes. Now, Raw Thrills. Raw Thrills had gotten started in 2004, and as mentioned, was founded by ex-Midway people, Eugene Jarvis, one of those, who's the famous name behind that company. But they had released Target Terror in 2004. They'd done The Fast and the Furious. It was originally designed as essentially a cruising sequel. They were going to call Hot Cars, but they decided to throw the license onto that. And so with Superbikes, it kept the same formula going that was used in The Fast and the Furious, which was used in cruising, going just now with motorcycles. So Superbikes is essentially Cruising World with motorcycles. Just have licensed bikes in different locations around the world, but the tracks are not based on real locations or real roads. It's just pick this area and you can drive in a place that looks like Switzerland or something along those lines. But Superbikes has done well, and that was due to the swivel bike controller. That went a long ways to making it very popular and standing out, and Superbikes 2 is still sold on the market, the sequel that came out in 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. Yeah, that was Raw Thrills' first foray into motorbike racing. Now for a name that I haven't dropped yet, and that would be Namco. And so, as mentioned, Namco hadn't given up on the arcade sector either with the downturn. But with 2006, they brought back one of their big guns, pun intended, and that would be Time Crisis 4. Now, Time Crisis 5 had come out around 1995. 1996 in that area, and with Time Crisis 4 it obviously had some other prequels that helped build up to what it was, and so it maintained one aspect from Time Crisis 3 that involved changing or having a weapon selection, which allowed you to have different types of weapons, and like say when you get a machine gun, it almost felt like the Crisis Zone Time Crisis spin-off. But of course you still had the mechanic of hold the pedal down or release it when need be to hide or take your shots. But another thing that Time Crisis 4 added to the whole mechanic was the multi-hide system. So by pointing your gun off the screen in a certain direction, you could go look at a different area. And they created some interesting scenarios that allowed you to have multiple different targets to worry about. at a time instead of just looking over a wide scene. Now, another thing that Time Crisis 4 did was took a page from Gunblade NY, and on stage 2 you actually, or 1-2 I think it is, where you get into a helicopter, you have unlimited ammunition, and you fly around blasting targets, and it feels a lot like Gunblade in the way that it works, just without those enormous force feedback guns. But the way that the helicopter goes around targets, it just feels so similar to that, just with much better graphics. But of course, don't forget, Time Crisis 5 is currently selling right now. They released that one last year, and it does maintain some elements from Time Crisis 4, just instead of the multi-direction thing with pointing at the screen, they have the dual pedals. But anyways, that was Time Crisis 4. Now, last but not least, is another Sega title, and that would be something that has a name to it. Maybe not as big as Street Fighter or Tekken, but definitely a name as its, I would say, Sega's signature fighting game, and that would be Virtua Fighter 5. Now, Virtua Fighter caused waves in the early 90s as it was a 3D fighting game instead of a two-dimensional one, and with that, it also was deeper in that it tried to be more of a simulation fighting game as opposed to just more of the button mashing or magical attacks, anything like that. And so Virtua Fighter has a long history through the 90s and the 2000s, but Virtua Fighter 5 marked the modern installment of that, giving us detailed 3D environments. Also showed off the Lindbergh hardware and showing moving water as characters would move through it, or snow that would deform, things of that nature, and improved animations and attacks so that you could do deeper strategies in how you fought. And so overall, this was you could say a highly respected, very well reviewed game. Sega did come out with several upgrades to this, which were kind of sequels, but not so much. They still maintained the Virtua Fighter 5 name, just added something to it like R. Yeah, this was the last time that they had come out with something along those lines. Now in Japan they still do some two-dimensional fighters that they release through their online networks, but when it comes to the 3D or the signature type game, Virtua Fighter is definitely it. So maybe one day we'll see Virtua Fighter 6. For now, just have to find a Virtua Fighter 5 cabinet and enjoy that. Well, thank you for watching this and all the other videos that have covered different years and games that are turning a certain age. I hope you enjoyed it, and it's been informative to some degree. Now, of course, as in the other videos, I don't cover every single game that was released in the year, just those that were commonly known or sold the best. So I'll end this off with a honorable mentions sort of thing, covering a few titles like Guilty Gear XX and a couple of others. But thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.